Hey guys. Tonight we're sinking into the sticky, muddy world of the medieval peasant, where your bed is straw, your breakfast is dry bread, and your dreams are mostly about not dying before the next frost. Picture this. You're born in a drafty timber hut next to a pig. Not near a pigsty, literally next to a pig, because warmth is communal and floors are optional. Your mother is exhausted. Your father is absent. A neighbor woman cuts your cord with a dull knife, mutters a prayer, and hands you off like you're another root vegetable to deal with. There is no celebration. No name until later. No guarantee you'll make it to your first birthday. Welcome to the lowest rung on the feudal ladder. Hope you like mud. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments. Where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're a peasant, born and raised. Your feet are bare most of the time. Your hands chapped by age 6, and your future locked into a rhythm of hunger and obedience before your baby teeth are gone. Your father, if he's around, is hunched and leathery, already missing half his teeth. Your mother wakes before the sun and boils something vaguely edible in a cracked pot. You don't ask what it is. You just eat it. You learned early that questions don't make gruel taste better. Historians still argue whether peasants were truly miserable all the time or whether they found ways to cope through community and routine. But if you're a child in this century, you're mostly coping with diarrhea. You live in a one-room hut. The roof leaks. The walls are wattle and daub, which sounds charming until you realize it's mud, straw, and manure woven together into something that pretends to be a wall. You sleep on straw. Maybe a blanket if someone didn't trade it for grain. The pigs sleep next to you, and honestly, they smell better than Uncle Elric. There's no privacy, no locks, no quiet, just the sound of snoring, farting, coughing, and occasionally, something scuttling across the rafters that probably wasn't supposed to be there. You learn to be small. Not metaphorically. You're genuinely small because your diet is 80% bread and 20% hope. You don't grow tall. You don't grow strong. You grow stringy, lean, and fast at ducking when your older brother throws clods of dirt at your head. Quirky fact. Babies weren't always given names right away in some communities because the chances of surviving the first few years were so grim. You might be the little one for a while, just in case. By age 7, you're useful. That means you're herding chickens, collecting kindling, scaring crows, and carrying things slightly heavier than your spine should handle. No school, no play, just chores. If you're lucky, you get to stir something boiling without burning your face off. Your first understanding of the world is simple. Some people give orders, and you are not one of them. Your Lord owns the land, the church owns your soul, your parents own nothing but exhaustion. And you? You own a wooden spoon. You know the seasons like you know your own hands. Spring is planting. Summer is sweating. Autumn is harvesting. Winter is hoping you don't freeze to death. But every season begins the same, with your boots stuck in mud, your fingers aching, and the smell of wet wool clinging to your tunic like regret. Mud is your constant companion. It gets in your food, your bed, your ears. The fields are always wet, your path always slippery, and your dignity somewhere back near the pigsty. And yet, you survive. somehow. You find small ways to endure. A warm fire, a good joke, a stolen apple, a moment in the sun where nothing hurts and no one is shouting. You laugh when someone slips. You hum when the wind is soft. You whisper stories you only half remember to your siblings by firelight, wrapping fantasy around their hunger like a wool cloak. Because in this life, born of dirt and debt, every scrap of comfort matters. And you're not giving up. Not yet. You wake up to the sound of someone coughing. Not the polite kind, but the deep, wet sort that means another winter infection is making its rounds. You lie still for a second, curled beneath your scratchy blanket, already bracing for the day. Your stomach growls loudly. You sit up, brush straw from your tunic, and move toward the hearth. What's for breakfast? Same thing as yesterday. And the day before that? A hunk of coarse bread, if there's any left. Maybe some leftover gruel clinging to the sides of the pot. And water from the bucket if it hasn't frozen solid. You chew slowly, because you have to make this lump of rye and what even is that stretch till midday. It tastes like regret, and you're pretty sure one bite chipped a molar. That's fine. You only need about 3 teeth to survive, right? Historians will later describe your diet as monotonous, but surprisingly adequate. You'd like to punch them gently with your calloused hand. Bread is your lifeline. It's what you eat morning, noon, and, if you're lucky, night. The quality depends on the harvest, which depends on the weather, which never seems to cooperate. Too wet, rot. Too dry, drought. Too windy, bye-bye wheat. If you're lucky, the bread is mostly grain. If you're not, it's mostly filler, acorns, peas, beans, ground-up bark, or the ever-mysterious vetch, which sounds like a weed and probably is. You sometimes eat pottage. That's a peasant stew. Think of it as gruel's slightly more social cousin. It bubbles in a pot for days, made of whatever's available. Onions, leeks, stale bread. A bone that's been boiled so long it's turned into an abstract concept of meat. You eat this slowly because a second serving isn't guaranteed. Ever. Quirky fact, medieval peasants sometimes added clay or powdered chalk to stretch their bread supply. It filled stomachs and slowly destroyed teeth and digestion alike. So yeah, enjoy your meal. When harvests fail, things get worse. You remember that one year, the bad year, when everything shriveled in the fields and even the rats seemed skinnier. Your family boiled thistle roots and tree bark. People ate cats. Someone tried to chew leather, and not in a fun medieval cosplay way. Hunger doesn't just pinch, it haunts. It becomes your shadow. You wake up hungry, you go to sleep hungry, and in between you talk about food like it's an old lover who left for a warmer country. You're never not thinking about your next bite. And even when you do get enough to eat, it's not exactly nourishing. Your body is slowly wearing out, the way a roof collapses one soggy reed at a time. And yet, somehow, you joke about it. Bread again? Someone says, holding up a brick-like slice. At least it won't run off the plate, someone else mutters. You all laugh like it's not a little sad. Some days you dream of meat. You had salted pork once at a midsummer festival. It was the richest, saltiest, most glorious thing you'd ever tasted. You talked about it for 3 months like a knight talks about his lost lady. Most of the year, you might get a bit of lard smeared on your bread, or if you're truly lucky, a scrap of cheese. But meat? That's for feast days, for weddings, for when someone important dies and the mourners are given the leftover bones. Even then, you're chewing on sinew more than substance, but still, You savor every bite like it's gold. Historians still argue whether peasant diets were better than those of later industrial workers. Some say yes, vegetables, whole grains, fewer processed foods. Others say, sure, if you ignore the parasites, famine, and total lack of vitamin C. You feel it when you stand up too fast. That dizzy sway, the ache in your joints, the thinness of your arms. But you carry on, because what else is there to do? At night, your dreams are sometimes full of food. Roasted chicken, honey cakes, figures. You wake up chewing nothing but air and regret. But you survive. You always do. And tomorrow, you'll wake up and eat that same grayish, cracked slice of bread, and it'll taste like victory. By the time you hit your 20s, if you're lucky, you walk like someone twice your age. You rise slowly each morning, not out of laziness, but because your knees don't straighten like they used to. Your back aches before you even leave the bed. You're not old, technically, but your body doesn't seem to know that. Toothache is a constant companion. One molar throbs when it rains, another oozes something unpleasant, and you haven't chewed confidently in months. You mostly gnaw on one side and hope for the best. You've considered yanking it out yourself. You even tried once, with a loop of string and a steady door. It did not end well. Your gums bleed. Your breath could melt iron. But hey, at least everyone smells like this. Hygiene? Let's not pretend there's a system. You bathe when you can, usually in cold streams. Soap, if it's around, is made from ash and animal fat and smells like despair. You scrape more than scrub, and afterward you still feel vaguely coated in farm. You wash your hands before meals, but that's mostly just a rinse. Fingernails are always black. There's always something under them. Dirt, dung, a splinter of onion from 3 days ago. And yet, you keep eating. Because survival isn't clean. It's grimy and wet and full of smells you learn not to question. You get boils, lice, rashes. You scratch discreetly and avoid eye contact. No one talks about it. Everyone knows. Historians often note the rampant presence of skin diseases, infections, and vermin among peasants. But written records rarely dwell on the sheer itchiness of existence. You, however, live with it. You once had a fever so bad you thought God was poking your brain. You muttered nonsense for 2 days and woke up wrapped in damp cloth, your sister crying quietly beside you. You lived, but your hearing never quite returned in your left ear. You know people who weren't so lucky. One boy you grew up with, he cut his leg on a rusty plow. It swelled, turned purple, and by week's end, the leg was black and smelled wrong. They tried to cut it off. He screamed until he passed out, died the next morning. They buried him in a shallow grave with his favorite wooden horse. Quirky fact, amputation was rarely a formal affair for peasants. It was more like someone holds you down while someone else hacks quickly and hopes you don't bleed out. The tools, whatever's nearby and vaguely sharp. You've seen herbs help, yarrow for bleeding, comfrey for swelling. Some women in the village know how to mix a poultice. But mostly, illness is a gamble. You drink broth. You pray. You wait. You fear childbirth more than battle. You've watched women scream for hours. Some live, some don't. Some bleed for days afterward and simply stop. You try not to think about it too hard. But sometimes, late at night, you run your fingers across your stomach and wonder what's growing and whether it will stay. Historians still argue whether peasant life was short and brutal for everyone, or whether extended family and village support made things more bearable. You know what's true for you. Help comes sometimes, but pain stays. You keep walking. Your joints creak. Your hip has a permanent click from falling off a hay wagon last year. You cough in the mornings. There's a rattle in your chest that never quite goes away. But you smile sometimes, because what else can you do? You laugh when a goose bites your cousin's ankle. You sit in the sun and let it warm your spine. You let the children braid your hair, even though it tangles like old rope. And when someone asks how you're feeling, you always say the same thing. I've had worse. Because you have, and you will again. But for now, you're upright, breathing. And in this life, that's enough. You don't get to choose when you fall ill, but if you're smart or just lucky, you avoid getting sick on a Sunday. Not because of holiness, because it's inconvenient. The priest is busy, the Reeves at the manor, and the one woman who knows how to treat boils with goose fat and dandelion root is nursing her cousin's baby. You wake one morning shivering. Your head is hot, your feet are cold. Your mouth tastes like mildew, and you can't stand up without your eyes going dark at the edges. Your mother lays a hand on your forehead, mutters, "Too warm," and wraps you in every cloth she can find. You lie still, sweating, coughing, half listening to the sound of chickens scratching outside. By evening, you're worse. Someone fetches Agnes. Agnes is not a doctor. No peasant sees a doctor unless they live near a monastery or they're actively bleeding in a noble's garden. But Agnes has 3 things that matter: knowledge, confidence, and something in a jar that smells like garlic and regret. She smears it on your chest, prays aloud, and forces you to drink something that tastes like sour wine mixed with turnip water. You sleep for a long time. Historians still argue whether medieval folk medicine did any good or simply bought time. But in your experience, a well-placed poultice and a firm hand at the bedside are better than nothing. You survive, just barely. But not everyone does. You remember when little John passed away last spring? He'd caught a cough, just a cough, and then within 3 days, he was gone. They buried him wrapped in the same cloth he'd been born in. The village sang. His mother didn't speak for a week. Quirky fact: medieval peasants sometimes hung herbs in doorways or wore amulets stuffed with dried flowers to ward off illness. It didn't always work, but it made you feel like you were doing something. Illness isn't just sickness, it's isolation. People step back when you cough. They avoid your doorway. Your siblings move to sleep farther from you. You lie there alone, too weak to move, too scared to ask if it's serious. And then there's the gossip. She's been coughing for days. Must be a punishment. Remember what she said to the miller last week? I heard she sleeps with her feet pointing west. Bad omen. Fear is contagious. More contagious than the illness itself. If you recover, the whispers fade. Eventually. But if your symptoms linger, if your voice doesn't come back right, if your skin turns pale, if your hair falls out, people notice. You know a girl who lost half her hair during a fever. She tried to cover it with cloth, but the village boys still made jokes. She left the next year to marry in another town. No one's heard from her since. The church offers prayers, but not medicine. Confession, but not comfort. You once asked the priest why God made so many people sick. He told you sickness was a trial, that you should be grateful for the chance to prove your endurance. You would have thrown a turnip at him if you weren't so dizzy. So you rely on each other. When your aunt broke her ankle, The village women carried her food. When your brother sliced his arm on a plow, the smith gave him salve and tied it with a leather scrap. You give what you can, because next time it could be you. You spend your days listening for coughs, checking for rashes, praying the baby's fever doesn't spike. You notice if someone skips market or misses church. You count who comes to the well. And when someone knocks on your door holding their belly or limping slightly, you nod, pull out the jar of garlic regret, and say, "Lie down. I'll fetch Agnes." Because illness doesn't care about fairness, but you do. Winter begins with a hush. Not a peaceful hush, but the kind that makes your breath stick in your throat. The trees go bare. The fields turn to frozen scars. The animals grow quiet, too quiet, and the sky seems to fold itself down into an unblinking gray lid. You pull your cloak tighter, but the wind still finds your ribs. The season isn't just cold, it's a siege. Everything in your life becomes a countdown. How much firewood is left, how many turnips remain, how long until the salted meat goes sour, how many more nights your bones can take sleeping on frozen straw. You learn to eat slower. Bread is rationed. The hard kind now, twice baked, cracked down the middle, chewy like bark. Pottage thins out with water. You gnaw the last root vegetables down to nubs. You dream about butter the way knights dream about dragons. Your fingers crack and bleed. You warm them by the fire, then immediately jam them under your armpits because the firewood is almost gone and no one wants to make another trip to the forest. Not with the wolves. Yes, wolves. Quirky fact. In lean winters, wolves really did come near villages, desperate and bold. You remember one night, howling outside the sheep pen. You stuffed wool in your ears and prayed it wasn't a dog you knew. Everything smells of smoke. The hearth runs all day. The inside of your hut becomes its own kind of smokehouse. Clothes, hair, bread, even your dreams are tinged with ash. You share body heat like it's coin. 2 to a bed. 3, if the baby's still fussy. You sleep shoulder to shoulder, a tangled lump of limbs and sighs. The pigs huddle close, not because you like them, but because they radiate warmth better than Uncle Thomas ever did. Your breath clouds in front of your face indoors. Snow comes late this year. It falls in heavy sheets, wet and clinging, and you have to break a crust of ice just to reach the privy. You've slipped more times than you care to admit. One time you landed on your tailbone so hard you couldn't sit right for 2 weeks. Historians still debate how harsh medieval winters really were and whether climate shifts made certain centuries worse. But you don't need charts to know your toes haven't been warm since Michaelmas. You stay inside more. Stories fill the dark. Old ones, about saints and soldiers. New ones, about local girls marrying above their station. Jokes about the reeve and his unfortunate nose. You laugh, even if it feels like a cough trying to sneak out. Candles are rare. You burn rushlights, stalks dipped in tallow, smoky and brief. You learn to squint in the gloom, and when the light goes out, you sit in the dark and listen to the fire wheeze and pop. Winter is when you really notice how many people are gone. That neighbor boy who helped with the carts, he didn't last. That sweet woman who used to sing, her bed's been empty since November. The old man with the apple smile. They said he slipped, but everyone knows he hadn't eaten in days. Every morning, you count how many voices you hear. Every evening, you check who came to the well. And still somehow, you laugh. You dance on feast days, slow, bundled, ridiculous stomps around the fire. Someone plays a whistle. Someone else drums on a pot lid. You stomp in circles and clap with mittens on and feel the joy burn off the chill for one blessed moment. You don't have gloves. You wrap your hands in cloth. You double your socks and still lose feeling in your toes. You learn tricks. Sit on your hands, hold warm stones, sleep with your feet against someone's stomach. You don't complain. Much. Because everyone's cold. Everyone's hungry. And no one wants to hear you whine when they're chewing leather scraps. You mark days on the door frame with charcoal. You count them down like a prisoner. You pray for spring. And until it comes, you survive. With brittle bread, with smoky cloaks, with bruised knees, with stubborn breath and the kind of will that frost can't kill. The first time you hear them, you're not sure if it's wind or something worse. A low howl beyond the trees, then a crack of branches, then silence. Wolves again, or something else? Danger is always around you, but winter sharpens it, makes it bolder. You wrap your shawl tighter and stare into the woods, trying to remember if you latched the goat pen. You live in fear, but not the loud kind. Not knights and sieges and castles in flames fear. No, yours is the quiet dread. The kind that creeps on 4 legs or 2, or wears a smile and a cross. Let's talk about wolves first. Quirky fact, some medieval villages lit bonfires or hung bells on their livestock to ward them off. You tried that once, bells tied to sheep legs. The result was noisy panic, tangled wool, and one very offended goat. Still, wolves are just hungry. You can respect that. Bandits, though? That's a different story. They don't always come with shouting and torches. Sometimes they sneak into town just before dark, pretend to be travelers, and then disappear with your best chicken. Or worse, your only knife. They steal food, tools, sometimes people. You once knew a girl, Matilda. Bright eyes, fast laugh. One day, she was walking back from the stream. Next day, gone. People muttered that she'd run off with a soldier. Others whispered it was men from the forest. No one really knew. And no one really looked. Because in your world, if you go missing, it's usually permanent. Historians still argue how prevalent rural banditry really was. Some claim the fear was greater than the reality. But you've seen what a stolen ox can do to a family. That one loss ripples for months, years. Then there's the clergy. Yes, the priest blesses your children. Yes, he says the words at burials and weddings and feast days. Yes, he mumbles Latin while swinging smoke that makes your eyes sting. But let's be honest, he's also terrifying. He knows your sins before you do. He knows when your skirt's too short, when you skipped morning mass, when you muttered something under your breath about the price of tithes. And he always seems to appear when you're thinking the wrong thoughts. Like now. Like wondering if God really wants you to starve. You once confessed to hiding a bit of flour from the tax collector. The priest made you kneel on stone for an hour. Your knees bled. You swore never to hide again. You also swore never to confess anything ever again. He's not the worst, but he watches. And when he speaks, people listen, which makes him more dangerous than wolves. The real fear, though, it's not what creeps through the trees or rides down the road. It's the unknown. You fear the sound of galloping hooves, someone shouting your Lord's name. You fear messengers in fine coats who bring edicts you don't understand but must obey. You fear coins changing hands in places you'll never see, but that somehow decide whether you eat next month. You fear being sent away, pressed into service, drafted, accused, forgotten. You once saw a woman taken for theft. She swore she'd just found the turnips lying there. The bailiff didn't care. They locked her in stocks in the village square. You brought her water when no one was looking. She never thanked you, but she cried. And you remember her face every time you pick up a carrot from the ground and glance around, just in case someone's watching. Because in this world, danger is everywhere. It bites, it steals, it preys, it smiles. And yet, somehow, you go on. You bar the door with a stick. You sing softly to keep the dark at bay. You clutch the knife with the bent handle and sleep light. You tell yourself, it won't be tonight. And most of the time, you're right. Your hands are full of dirt before the sun even clears the trees. That's not poetic. That's just life. You kneel in the furrows, planting seeds you'll never taste, on land you don't own, under skies that never seem to smile. You're a peasant, a villain, technically, which is a fancy medieval way of saying you belong to someone else. You belong to the land, and the land belongs to the Lord. He owns the fields, the woods, the pigs, the mill, the fish pond, the bees, and probably the clouds if you asked him. You owe him labor. You owe him taxes. You owe him obedience. What does he owe you? Well, sometimes he doesn't burn the village down. You work from sunrise to sunset, and it's never enough. There's always another row, another fence to mend, another stubborn patch of soil that refuses to yield even after you've bled into it. Your tools are old, your fingers blistered, your spine a twisted question mark. Quirky fact, many peasants only had 1 or 2 tools, usually inherited, repaired, or entirely improvised. You once planted an entire barley row using a stick you sharpened with your teeth. It worked, barely. Your daily rhythm is feudal clockwork. You owe the Lord a set number of days each year. On those days, your time is his. You plow his land, harvest his wheat, chop his wood, and carry his grain to his mill, where you pay his fee to grind it. Even your free days aren't really free. You work your own tiny plot, trying to coax food from tired soil. You mend the roof, patch your tunic, scrub the inside of a cooking pot until the rust is just a suggestion. You don't complain, or if you do, you mutter quietly to the cows. They listen better than the reeve. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants were completely oppressed or had some agency in their communities. You've never seen much agency. But you have seen the reeve fall into a mud puddle, and that was close enough. When the Lord rides past on his big horse with his bigger hat, you bow. You don't smile. Smiling looks suspicious. You keep your eyes low and hope he doesn't notice you exist. Sometimes he nods. That's the best case scenario. Worst case? He tells the steward he needs a new stable hand, and suddenly your youngest brother is taken for duty. He comes back weeks later, covered in horse bites and resentment. Everything feels borrowed. You borrow land, tools, warmth, and time. You borrow grace and patience and space to breathe. You borrow your own life one season at a time, praying the ledger doesn't come due. You've heard of free men, peasants who pay rent instead of labor. Sounds like a myth. You can't imagine handing over coin instead of your aching back. Coin is for lords, merchants, and drunk gamblers. You haven't seen more than a few pennies your entire life. And yet, you take pride in what little is yours. A carved spoon, a scrap of embroidered cloth your mother stitched, a clay cup with one chip, always warm from porridge, your corner of the hut, your spot on the bench, your row in the field where you swear the barley grows straighter than anyone else's. These are your kingdom. And sometimes, when you rest your arms on the plow and watch the sun drop behind the trees, you feel something like contentment. Not happiness exactly, but the fierce, quiet satisfaction of still being here, still standing, still yours. You hear him before you see him. Hooves on the road, the jangle of a leather pouch, the smug silence of a man who's never gone hungry in his life. The tax man. He doesn't knock. He doesn't ask. He steps over your threshold with muddy boots and ink-stained fingers, holding a scroll that lists what you owe, as if the land itself tattled. You owe grain. You owe eggs. You owe a third of the goat cheese your mother hid behind the chimney. How does he know about that? Probably gossip, or divine judgment, or just the fact that no secret survives in a village with 5 huts and 1 nosy baker. Taxes aren't once a year, they're every moment. There's rent to your lord, a tithe to the church, a tenth of everything, even the bad turnips. Then there's boon work, Harriet when someone dies, Merchant if your daughter gets married, Chevage if you leave town, and feudal incidents, which sound like sneezes but hit like punches. You once joked that your nose should pay a shadow tax, since it's always under the same sun. No one laughed. They were too tired. Quirky fact, some lords even charged peasants to use communal ovens. That's right, if you dared to bake bread in someone else's fireplace, you had to pay for the privilege of not starving. You've tried to hide things. Everyone has. You buried a bag of onions last harvest, came back to find them rotted through and chewed by beetles. The taxman still took the dry husks, claimed they counted. The worst part? He doesn't even seem cruel. Just indifferent. Like he's collecting laundry, not livelihoods. And if you argue, he writes a note. Not an angry note, a calm one, with your name, your father's name, and a small mark that means someone in a fur coat will visit later, probably on horseback, probably with a whip. Historians still debate how severely taxes impacted daily peasant life. Some argue it created stability through predictable obligation. Others say it was an open wound that never closed. You don't care which version is true. You just know what it feels like. Empty. You once watched a family lose their plow horse to tax, a horse they'd raised from birth. It pulled their cart, turned their soil, kept their lives in motion. After it was taken, the family tried to farm by hand. By winter, they were gone. You whisper, "Next year will be better," while pressing coins into a man's palm. But next year never seems to listen. The church is no refuge. The priest's tithe is due whether your harvest was blessed or blighted. He accepts with soft words and outstretched hands. And if you fall behind, well, God forgives. The priest doesn't. You didn't, because fear taxes you too. Still, you find ways to push back, just a little. You overwater the barley before inspection. You hide your best apples in a friend's hut. You switch names on a list, hoping no one remembers who Wulfric the Younger really is. It's not rebellion. It's survival. You are taxed by coin, by labor, by silence, by watching your children count acorns like treasure and pretend soup made of bark is a game. And yet, somehow, you smile when the taxman leaves, not because you paid, but because, for one more season, you weren't bled dry. You walk to the field, shoulders heavy, stomach hollow, but legs still moving. And in this world, Movement is the only victory that matters. Your child is coughing again. Not the mild kind. The deep, rattling cough that seems to reach all the way down into their ribs and drag something loose. You press your palm to their forehead. Too warm. Eyes glassy. The kind of fever that makes you whisper to yourself without realizing. This is the 5th illness this season. You've already buried one child. You know how this story can end. Infant mortality is just a phrase to historians. To you, it's a pit in the ground behind the chapel, marked by a wooden cross your uncle carved in silence. They say children are a blessing. They say it as if blessings come without conditions, as if every birth isn't followed by a breathless year of waiting to see if the child will stay. Your first baby died before they had a name. Your second one lived. Now, your third coughs in the dark while you hold them wrapped in the best wool you own, which isn't great, honestly, but it's better than nothing. Quirky fact, medieval peasants often swaddled babies for months at a time, arms bound, legs straight, like little parcels of hope. Some believed it kept them strong. Others just didn't want them wriggling near the hearth. You sing softly, the same lullaby your mother sang to you, half nonsense, half prayer, mostly rhythm. You repeat the lines even after they fall asleep, because you're too scared to stop. You remember the times they laughed, that first hiccup of joy when they saw the goat trip on a bucket, the first time they clapped for rain, the way they whispered fire like it was magic. You would do anything to keep that light from fading. And yet, so much is out of your hands. Historians still argue whether large peasant families were a strategy for survival or simply the result of lack of alternatives. But you know this, every child is born into a wager against disease, against hunger, against accidents. And the odds are brutal. You've seen children fall into wells. You've seen them kicked by livestock. You've seen a baby disappear into fever overnight, their body limp and quiet before you even had time to panic. You don't talk about those memories much, but they live behind your eyes. Still, you hope. Every smile is a reason, every sticky hand grabbing your tunic, every rock they proudly hand you like it's gold. You laugh when they mispronounce goose as goop. You teach them how to tie bundles, how to fold scraps of cloth, how to recognize wild herbs. You treat every moment like it might matter, because it does. And then, there are the moments you dread. When food is short and there's not enough for everyone. When you have to choose. You eat less so they can eat more. You give them the slightly fresher egg. You pretend you're full. You do it again and again, until your own body feels hollow and soft as straw. Because that's what survival means now. You don't dream big dreams for them. You just want them to live long enough to choose who they marry, to dance in spring without coughing, to have a day without blisters or bruises or hunger. That would be enough. Once, someone asked what your child's future might look like. You stared at the ground and said, "I hope they have their own chicken someday." It wasn't a joke. A chicken is food. A chicken is trade. A chicken is independence in feathered form. You've watched kids chase after their first egg like it's treasure. Because it is. You love your children in ways that historians never write about. In the way you warm their shoes by the fire. In the way you pretend you don't notice when they steal an extra scrap of bread. In the way you brush lice from their scalp without scolding. Love is practical here. Quiet, relentless. and it is the only thing that feels stronger than the world trying to take them away from you. It starts with a hiss, a quiet one, just enough to make your ears twitch. Then the smell hits, thick, bitter, unmistakable. Smoke. You leap to your feet, heart already thudding, as someone shouts from outside. Fire! It's your neighbor's hut, and the wind is blowing toward yours. You throw open the door, and the night is lit in dancing orange. Sparks flutter like angry fireflies. You grab a bucket, even though you know it's probably too late. Everyone's running, hauling water, flinging cloaks, dragging goats. Flames eat straw faster than hunger eats bread. Within minutes, it's over. Or rather, everything is. What's left is smoldering ruin, wet ash, and a family standing barefoot in the mud, staring at the spot where their roof used to be. You look at your own hut. You wonder if yours is next. Accidents are the true tyrants of peasant life. They don't wait for wars or plagues. They strike when someone forgets to bank the fire, when a cow kicks the wrong way, when a child trips carrying the soup pot. You've nearly lost your home to lightning once. The thatch caught, just a little. You beat it out with a stool, your hands blistered for days. Quirky fact, some medieval huts had small holes in the roof to let out smoke. No chimney, just hope and guesswork. On windy nights, that meant embers floating up and ash drifting back down onto your bedding. Your home isn't much. Wattle and daub. A bit of timber. One door that squeaks, one roof that leaks. But it's yours. Well, as much as anything can be. You built the bench from a broken cart. You patched the wall with your uncle's old cloak. You carved your name into a rafter, just to remind yourself you exist. And one gust of wind could take it all. Historians still debate how common fires were in peasant villages, but you've seen enough scorched earth to know they didn't need to be frequent to be devastating. And it's not just fire. Floods come too. The river overflows with no warning, turning the road to soup. You've lost a whole sack of flour that way. Once a pig floated by, looking surprisingly calm. Then there's wind. A proper storm can peel the roof from your hut like a lid from a pot. You've woken to rain pouring in, soaking blankets, bread, and spirits alike. You pile rocks on the roof for weight and pray they hold. Your neighbor once stepped wrong on wet stones and shattered his ankle. No healing. He walks with a limp now, works slower, eats less. You understand. In this life, stability is an illusion. Everything can change in an instant. You remember when the well dried for a week. You drank from puddles. You chewed damp moss. You prayed for rain harder than you've ever prayed for forgiveness. You don't get insurance. You get rumors. Old Marta said it's the fault of the new woman's cat. No, it's a curse. The old tree was cut, and it was sacred. I heard it's the Lord's doing. He sold our rain to the next village. It doesn't matter what caused it. The hut is gone, and no one's coming to rebuild it for you. So you do what everyone does. You help. You share tools. You sleep closer together. You rebuild. Slower, sadder, but stubborn as ever. And then you try to laugh again. Because if you don't, you break. And there's no tax, no priest, no season crueler than a broken spirit. You gather scraps, stitch cloth into walls, plug holes with hope. It's not perfect, but it's home. Until it isn't. And then somehow, you start again. Somewhere, a bell tolls. You pause mid-step, fingers still wrapped around a bundle of straw, listening. One chime, two, then silence. Someone has died. You don't know who yet, but you'll know soon enough. News travels fast in a village where everyone's ears are always open and no one has walls thick enough to muffle grief. You place the straw down gently. Death deserves a moment. You're not new to this. By your age, you've dug more graves than you've dug wells. You've stood in enough churchyards, rain in your hair and mud on your boots, watching a priest mumble over a mound that's still steaming from breath and tears. Sometimes it's someone old, someone who lived long enough to forget names and confuse goats with grandsons. But more often, it's someone too young, or someone too necessary. There are no good deaths here, only less terrible ones. Quirky fact, medieval burials often included a simple shroud, sometimes just a sack. Coffins were rare among peasants, reserved for lords and clergy. You once saw one, carved oak and lined with fabric, and thought it looked more like a boat than a bed. You wonder if that's the point, sailing off to somewhere else. The dead aren't just mourned, they're also feared, not for who they were, for what they might become. You've heard the stories. Corpses that don't stay still, spirits that slip from their graves. The priest says it's superstition. The baker's wife says she saw her brother's ghost by the river. You believe her more than him. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly feared the undead or if those tales were symbolic. But you've kept garlic near your bed, just in case. And you never whistle near the chapel after dark. You help dig the grave. The soil is wet and reluctant. Each shovel of earth is heavier than the last. You try not to look at the body wrapped in cloth, face covered, hands tucked, mouth forever silent. When the priest finishes his rites, the villagers step forward. Some cross themselves, others toss in a pinch of soil. You stare, then reach for a stone and place it at the head. Small, smooth, just something to say. You mattered. Back at home, the air feels different. The fire burns lower. Conversation is softer. Someone's made a pot of weak ale, and people take sips between long pauses. You remember when your own grandmother died. She had a laugh like a kettle boiling over and fingers always dusted with flour. One day, she simply stopped waking. You kept checking every hour until your mother finally whispered, "She's gone." You didn't cry until the next morning, when you found her apron still hanging by the hearth. The dead don't haunt you with fear. They haunt you with absence. No one to hum while kneading dough. No one to spit into the fire and say, "It'll pass," when things went wrong. No one to say your name like it was a secret worth keeping. You tell stories. Not big ones. Little ones. The time they tripped over a chicken. The way they used to wink before lying. The noise they made when sneezing that sounded like a donkey hiccuping. That's how you remember. Not through tears, through laughter, through mimicry, through a quiet, "Do you remember when?" And when you lie down that night, staring at the rafters, you whisper their name once, just in case they're still listening. The fair only comes once a year. You count the days with marks on a stick, and by the time it arrives, your hands are twitchy from anticipation, and your tunic looks like it fought a goose and lost. Doesn't matter. Everyone looks like that, because the fair is escape. For one day, maybe two if the reeve's in a good mood, you leave behind your fields, your debts, your blisters, and your peeling ceilings. You put on your least patched socks, walk to the green, and let yourself be someone else. There's music, real music. Not just your uncle whistling with a reed between his teeth. There's a woman with a harp, a boy with a drum, and a man who plays a stringed thing that makes the air feel like honey. You don't dance well, but neither does anyone else. You stomp, you twirl, you try not to trip over that one guy who thinks flailing is the same as rhythm. Quirky fact, medieval fairs were not just for fun, they were major trading events. People sold livestock, bought shoes, hired laborers, and occasionally got married between the pig pens and pie stalls. You once saw a wedding sealed with a handshake and a shared turnip. Romantic. You sniff the air. Roasted meat, spiced cider, something doughy. Your stomach roars like a church bell. You spend your only coin on a meat pie that is probably made with something you'd rather not think about. You eat it anyway, crumbs in your beard, grease on your chin, joy in your soul. There are jugglers, fire breathers, a man who claims to talk to birds. You hand him a scrap of bread, and his raven says your name. You're pretty sure it's a trick. You don't care. You buy a wooden spoon shaped like a duck. You don't need it, it doesn't stir better, but it makes you laugh. And in this life, anything that does that is worth carrying. Historians still debate how accessible fairs really were to peasants. Some say they were rare luxuries. Others argue they were woven into the rhythm of village life. You believe the latter, because without the fair, people would come undone. You see faces you forgot were capable of smiling. Even the priest looks less like he's biting a lemon. He blesses the cider tent and sneaks a drink. You pretend not to notice. You see a girl with ribbons in her hair dancing like she's in a story. You see a boy try to impress her with handstands and fail gloriously. You see someone fall into a barrel and laugh like a child. You see yourself, not the tired, hunched, mud-covered you, but the version that remembers joy. And then there's the marketplace. Traders from far-off towns display bolts of cloth, painted pottery, exotic spices, and knives so sharp they could shave a sheep mid-run. You stare, you touch, you ask prices and nod like you might actually buy something. You won't, but dreaming costs nothing. You do buy a tiny pouch of dried mint. It smells clean. You carry it like treasure. Evening falls, the music softens, torches flicker, couples sneak off behind hedges, children fall asleep in laps. You sit by the edge of the fire, legs aching in the good way, and let the heat soak into your bones. You almost forget you're poor. You almost believe this is life all the time. And maybe for that one night, it is. You wake up sore. Not from labor, but from sleeping on the ground next to the fire after the fair, with a duck-shaped spoon jammed into your hip and the faint taste of cider still in your mouth. Worth it. But the world doesn't wait. The fair is over. The smile fades. And so, you return to routine. Except now your routine includes something new. An ache in your chest when you think about how good it felt to laugh. Still, there's work to do. Today, it's the communal bakehouse. You and the other villagers bring your dough, some dark, some coarse, a few suspiciously green, lined up like offerings to the flame. The oven is massive, stone, and only fired once a week. It's hot enough to bake bread and singe eyebrows if you're not careful. You take turns, gossiping while the loaves rise and the air smells like what heaven should smell like. if heaven believes in bread. You hear everything at the bakehouse. Who's pregnant? Who's stealing wood? Who's been cursed? Who might marry whom, assuming they don't die first? It's like a newsletter, if newsletters were yelled through flowery mouths and included accusations of witchcraft. Quirky fact: some medieval bakehouses charged fees based on loaf size, and women would mark their bread with personal symbols to prevent swaps. Yours is a little spiral. It's crooked. You pretend it's on purpose. Today's big news? The miller is missing. No one likes the miller. His fees are too high, and his beard smells like soup. But missing is still missing. Some say he ran off. Others say he was taken by fairies. You nod solemnly while thinking, he probably just owes someone money. You collect your loaf. It's a little burnt. That's fine. Burnt bread lasts longer. Probably. Historians still argue how communal duties impacted social cohesion in peasant villages. Was it unity or obligation? You'd say both. You don't like everyone you work with, but there's comfort in shared suffering. Like cows huddled in rain, you're all miserable together. You stop by the field on your way home. Your wheat is growing, slowly, grudgingly, like a child asked to clean. You check the soil, murmur a few hopeful words, and flick a bug off a leaf with excessive force. Then, it's time for cloth. Your tunic's torn again. You sit by the fire with needle and thread, squinting in the dim light, poking your finger more than the fabric. You mutter curses under your breath that would make the priest faint. It's not good work, but it's your work. Every stitch says, I'm still trying. Evening comes. You help your neighbor lift a beam back onto their roof. You do it without being asked. No one thanks you. That's just how it works. Tomorrow, they'll help you chase your escaped pig. Probably. Someone sings while churning butter. Someone else spills lentils and curses like a nobleman. You smile, briefly. The fair is over. The taxman is still coming. The priest is back to frowning. The grain needs weeding, but your loaf is warm. Your tunic is patched. Your neighbor didn't fall off the roof this time. And tonight, that's enough. The moon is high when you wake to the sound of retching. It's your brother. Again. You scramble to his side, clutching a damp cloth, whispering nothing in particular, just syllables, soft and slow, as if sound alone might soothe him. His skin is hot. His eyes flicker. He mutters things you can't understand. You've seen this before. Fever, shivering, black blotches sometimes, coughs that bring up more than just phlegm. And fear, always fear. You wipe his brow. You mutter prayers. You hold his hand and pretend not to notice that his nails are turning blue. No one knows what it is. Or rather, everyone knows. Your neighbor says it's bad air. The blacksmith says it's sin. The baker says it's from the rat he saw in the chapel. The priest says it's God testing your faith. You say nothing. You're too busy fetching water and hoping it stays down. Quirky fact: people in the Middle Ages believed in humors, bodily fluids that had to stay in balance. Too much black bile, melancholy. Too much yellow bile, anger. Your brother must be brimming with all of them. None of it helps. You brew a concoction of herbs you found last summer: fennel, yarrow, a scrap of dried mint from the fair. It smells like boiled regret. He drinks half and gags. You call that progress. Historians still argue whether medieval medicine was entirely useless or just tragically uninformed. Truth is, some remedies helped. Most didn't. But trying is all you have. You visit the village healer. She's older than trees and smells like vinegar. She presses her wrinkled hands to your brother's chest and declares that a toad under his bed might draw out the sickness. You place a toad under the bed. The toad looks unimpressed. You burn lavender. You chant softly. You boil cloth and wave smoke and leave coins on the chapel step. You would do anything. Because illness is more than just danger, it's helplessness. You can't fight it with a shovel. You can't outwork it. You can't argue it down like a tax collector. It just is. And when it visits, it rarely comes for just one. By morning, your neighbor is coughing too. The priest announces a fast, as if hunger is the cure. The air feels heavy. The road is quiet. No birds, no dogs barking, just the occasional whisper of a name and whether they're still with us. You try not to think of what comes next. You clean the floor. You hum lullabies. You lie awake counting breaths. At dusk, your brother opens his eyes and asks for water. You laugh. You cry. You spill half the cup getting it to his lips. He drinks. He sleeps. He breathes. And you, for the first time in 3 nights, breathe too. He's not better. Not yet. But he's not worse. And in your world, that's called hope. It's fragile, flickering, feeble. But it's yours. You sit by the hearth that night, arms around your knees, watching the fire crackle like distant thunder. The healer said he's strong. You want to believe it. So you whisper to the flames, to the toad, to anyone listening. Let him stay. And for now, it seems, they listen. It rains for days, soft at first, like a sigh, then harder, louder, until the road is mud, the field is soup, and the air smells like rot and wet wool. The world feels soggy, like it could melt if the sun doesn't come soon. But you keep moving. You always do. Your brother is sitting up now, weak but smiling. That rare kind of smile that doesn't need words, just presence. You hand him broth, thin and hot, and he drinks without trembling. You decide that's worth celebrating. You whistle while feeding the chickens. You even hum when hauling water. Life has returned to something close to normal, which, for you, means it's simply not a disaster right now. You stretch your back and stare out across the damp fields. Clouds hang low, but they'll pass. They always do, or they won't. Either way, you have chores. Someone's roof has collapsed again. Someone's pig got into the grain store. Someone accidentally dyed all their socks blue. You lend a hand, share a laugh, shake your head in theatrical disbelief. Because life goes on. Quirky fact, peasants sometimes whitewash their cottage walls with lime not just for brightness, but as a crude form of sanitation. You tried it once. It got in your hair. You looked like a ghost for a week. You visit the bakehouse again, just to be social. There's new gossip. A merchant passed through and traded a mirror for a bolt of linen. A mirror. You peeked at your face in it. You looked tired, but alive. Historians still debate whether medieval peasants had time for joy. Most agree their lives were harsh. But you know better, because you've felt laughter shake your ribs beside the oven. You've seen children spin in circles for no reason but delight. You've whispered jokes at funerals just to make someone breathe again. Joy isn't the absence of hardship. It's the rebellion against it. And you, muddy, tired, debt-ridden, perpetually hungry, are a rebel every time you smile. So now, As night returns and the fire crackles low, you lie back on your straw mattress, eyes tracing shadows across the thatch. The air smells of onions and wood smoke. The wind scratches gently at the shutters. You listen to the breathing around you. Family, neighbors, life. The world outside may still be cruel, but inside this hut, for now, there is peace. And as your eyes grow heavy and your limbs finally ease, you think, I made it another day. That's everything. The candle flickers low. The walls of the hut blur and soften as your eyes close and your breathing slows. The rough straw beneath you no longer scratches, it just supports. A quiet cradle for a body that's earned its rest. Outside, the rain has eased to a hush, a rhythm like lullabies murmured through leaves. Far off, a dog barks once, then silence. You feel the warmth of the hearth nearby, not hot, just present. A quiet pulse in the dark. You roll gently onto your side, hands folded beneath your cheek, and let go of the weight you've carried. Tools, taxes, grief, and joy alike. Let it all settle. There will be more days, more toil, more wind and rain and mud and aching feet. But not now, not here. Now, there is only stillness, only breath, only the soft lull of sleep folding you under its wings. And in this moment, you are not a peasant. You are not poor. You are simply safe. So rest, traveler of time. Let the fields grow without you tonight. Let the crops wait. Let the taxman pass. Let the millstones stop turning and the chickens find their own way home. Sleep, deep and warm and undisturbed. Because you've done enough. You are enough. And morning will come gently, just not yet.